Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. I'm Ileana Diaz, also known as the COE, the chief of everything here at STS. Usually Joel is the host, but once a week or so I take over. And for full disclosure, I am married to Joel. I am his wife. And today we have a very, very special guest. We are honored to have her here online with us at STS, Ruth Markel. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much. And first of all, congratulations. So maybe you're on once a week, but you can also always go up. I'm really excited for all the women taking the lead and getting, into some initiatives specifically geared to whatever it is that you want to be talking about. But really, you have all of my blessings. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I appreciate you. And for full disclosure, Ruth and I have met a couple of times in person. She's as fabulous in person as she is here online. So when her and I were discussing this very show, I was very excited to have her. So thank you, Ruth. And for all of you guys that don't know who Ruth is, to understand who she is and why her perspective, her depth, her story is so important, you really have to understand who her son was and what happened to him. So we're going to play this video, and then I'm going to introduce Ruth and get right into it. Here we go.
A decade ago, a loving father.
Sorry about that. Let's start that over.
Nearly a decade ago, a loving father of two young boys and a rising Florida State University legal scholar was shot outside his Tallahassee home while sitting in his car. That man was Dan Markel. He died less than 24 hours later in the hospital. The Harvard Law School educated professor's life was cut short before ever even entering his prime. Danny, his family and friends knew him, had finalized his divorce from ex-wife Wendy Adelson in 2013, but they were still in a bitter dispute over finances, personal property, and allegations from Dan that his former mother-in-law, Donna Adelson, was disparaging Dan during her visits with grandchildren Ben and Lincoln. Tallahassee police interviewed Wendy, who told them about the divorce issues but denied that she was involved in the shooting. As investigators searched for clues, they interviewed Wendy Adelson's former boyfriend, Jeffrey Lacasse, who told them they should look into Wendy Adelson's brother, Charlie. Wendy also flagged Charlie to the police. Fast forward to 2023. We now know this was a murder for hire. The trigger man, Sigfredo Garcia, along with Latin King gang member Luis Rivera, were convicted of the heinous murder. So was Katie Magbanua. She's the link between the Miami hitmen and the Adelson family. Charlie Adelson was eventually arrested and went on trial just this past fall. More than 9 years after the murder,
first-degree murder.
It took the jury only 3 hours to reach a guilty verdict against Charlie Adelson, who was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Exactly 1 week after his conviction, to almost everyone's surprise, while trying to flee the country, matriarch Donna Adelson was also arrested. She was on the jetway at Miami International Airport boarding a flight to Dubai. Final destination was Vietnam. Donna was formally arraigned in December and now sits in a Tallahassee jail. Ironically, the same place she so desperately wanted her grandchildren to leave, and the reason most believe was the motive for Dan's cruel murder.
And Ruth, you saw that when you held the JAFCO event. That was the same story that Joel put together for you for that event.
And I have to compliment you both on it. I still think it's the greatest thing to get this very large story down to about 3 minutes. You really deserve a lot of credit. It's amazing, and I do use it, and thank you.
No, and thank you. And obviously, there's so much to this story. There's so much more, emotion, and it's such a journey, obviously, of what you've had to endure since 2014. So it is a short video. It is just a recap of everything that happened, but there's so much more. And obviously, no one knows that better than you, Ruth. This has been your reality since 2014. And for those of you guys that missed that, Ruth Markel is the mother of Dan Markel. He was a loved, intelligent, well-known law professor who was murdered in Tallahassee in 2014. But I do want to let you guys know that there is also so much more to Ruth than just that very title of the mother of a victim. Ruth is a phenomenal author. This is the book that many of us know her from. This is The Unveiling. We are putting this here in the chat so you can buy the book. Click on the link there. It's in the chat. We're also going to add it to the description. But this is her book, The Unveiling, about her journey, about grieving, about moving on, about making change. And I'm going to ask her about this in a minute. But something else you may not know about Ruth, Ruth Markel is an author of 9 books. And Ruth is also a very huge women advocate. She actually wrote about women empowerment at the workplace. She was just giving me some off-screen advice about life and careers and everything. So there is so much more to Ruth. She also was a businesswoman for many, many years. She has a leading management consulting firm. And Ruth has now taken all of her skills, all of her life experience, and has now shifted gears to focusing on finding justice, obviously, for her son, but also creating change for other people who are in the same position as her. So that's who Ruth is in a nutshell. But again, she's so much more than that. So thank you, Ruth, for being here. First and foremost, talk to us about what you're feeling right now as you're having to prepare for September as we head towards Donna's trial.
So first of all, thank you for that nice introduction. And I do want to say, you mentioned September, so there is possibility that the trial will be moved up, and I think it's important to say, from September 30th to September 16th because of the Jewish holidays. And we would really welcome that. We don't know yet that that is happening. It's really now up to the judge because the state attorney's office and the defense team have actually agreed that could be a new schedule. So I kind of want to highlight that part of it. And it's important too, because then everybody can get to Tallahassee, be a little more relaxed, because otherwise we're kind of running to the Jewish holidays and running back and forth to the court and so forth. So that would be, we are looking forward to that becoming an eventuality. So that's a really important part. The trial is coming up, but I wanted to just back up a little bit, and maybe before we just go forward, talk a little bit about some updates, because one of the things that we have, the public might not know it, but there is another relationship. The family has had 3 relationships with a different victim liaison people. It starts out with the Tallahassee Police Department, and then it moves to the state attorney's office. But once the appeals start, we have another relationship of communication and finding out with the Attorney General. So the appeals is not a visible process so much. I mean, you can always search it. And certainly some of the podcasters do a really good job, kind of all the time of updating on what the appeal status. So the one I'm not sure that the audiences yet know, we just received it about 10 days ago. Sigfredo Garcia had an appeal, lost the appeal, and then he had another appeal saying that he didn't get a good defense, basically, and that was now turned down. So Sigfredo Garcia has no more outstanding appeals, and I think it's just important to mention that. We are still in the midst of waiting for Catherine McBanawa's appeal, and also for Charlie Adelson, who's really a new appellate, just started out. So that's kind of something that just I wanted to share, because I know that it's not really a known issue. And I think right now what we're all sort of anticipating is that the state attorney's office is working hard really in preparing for the September trial. I did mention, and Joel had a very good guest on, I think that the devices, the evidence that'll come forward this coming trial, it's not my opinion, it's just how I think about what's available to the state attorney's office that could be news, let's say, and new, would be really some of the evidence that they have derived or will derive really from some of the devices that they have already picked up and had a subpoena before.
And Ruth, I'm obviously not a digital forensic expert, but I did watch Joel's show. And I know that on that show, they were specifically talking about that new Celebrate technology that is now able to recover some of the data that previously they were not able to access. And those forensic experts were saying that that's going to be a huge deal because they are going to be able to access things previously that they didn't have access to, both on iPads, on cell phones, on laptops, and also things from other apps, not necessarily just the hard drive of the phone and the device itself.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be the real big news. There's other people who are, sort of coming out of the woods, I'll call it. I don't want to call them witnesses, but other people are contributing information to different parts of what the trial can have in it. And I think that that's good. So it's really quite early. Like there's not that much that we can anticipate. I guess what I will say we could anticipate, it's about the only thing I can think of now. If the trial changes to September 16th, so all of those earlier dates, of which there's quite a few, the August case management, I think all those dates will be backed up or made earlier, whichever way you say it, into July. So I think that to me is about the only big news that will change a little bit the programming and the planning for the trial. And the rest is really quite private, meaning quiet. It's something that they work on. They always work very, very hard, and we're very appreciative to the state attorney's office all the time.
And Ruth, when we think about these trials, obviously, we're here as a trial watcher or as journalists or as, YouTube friends or as people who are more distant from this case. But this is obviously your life. We're talking about your son. We're talking about what happened to him. When you go into a trial like this, how are you mentally preparing? Because, you're having to relive this and go over everything all over again every time.
I would say that the trials are one of the most very difficult experiences at this stage. There's another issue, if you want to look at it, I talk a lot about grief and trauma, and one could actually say, and it's very possible, and because of the intensity of the trial, that it's re-victimization. So, that's a really important issue because you're putting yourself right back to the beginning of the whole murder and the whole death. I myself, I think I'm the only one at this point, I cannot stay in. I miss about 2 hours, probably on very close to day one. I don't stay in for the medical examiner's report. I don't stay in. So I'm talking about in the courtroom. When I say I don't stay in, that's what I'm trying to say. I don't stay in the autopsy. I don't stay in for the first police report, because that's when the photos really come out en masse. So that's my minimal way of really coping with something, because at this point, I have to say for myself, I don't have a lot of visual images of Danny's murder other than that whole terrible experience, watching the garage scene. This we've seen before. So that is a really important part. I don't think that the trials are easy to prepare for. I have things that have made me very uncomfortable over time periods. I discussed it in the book. There's, of course, the murder, the funerals, all the memorials, then the unveiling, and then the victim impact statement, which is in my book, which I actually did not enjoy and really preparing. And then every trial now we've been through really it's 4 trials and and several convictions and now another arrest. So this is not easy. This is, the trial really sets you back. There's no question. I could talk for myself. It's a setback.
And Ruth, I've seen you speak about the mourning process and grieving at the JAFCO event. You specifically were talking about this very personal journey for you. And a lot of us only know you now. And when we see you now, I can see all the comments here in the chat. Everyone is saying that you're incredible. You're so strong, that, you know, you just have it all together, that you are this like pillar of strength. And from our perspective, you really are. And you have left such an impact on the community. But many of our community members here at STS Nation who I've gotten to know are also dealing with heavy topics or with loss and trauma and a lot of different difficult situations. Through your experience, is there any kind of lesson or any kind of advice that you could give people who are going through one of the most difficult times of their life?
Yes, actually, and I'm actually have studied and talk a lot now about grief and trauma and so forth. And remember now, which is very sad for us, but we're going into our 10th year. Okay, so as much as this, you know, we look acceptable. I use the term acceptable. I don't mean the physical looks. I mean the feeling of, you know, we've come a long way. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, this was not an easy topic to be so public about and so forth. So I want to say something that I am learning, and I'm actually going to be running some programs on this. But the important part is the first part, grief doesn't have to be rushed. And I think everybody who is suffering, what's very good, there is good news out today in terms of how we see grief. And there's the early stages now could be, you know, 2-3 years. So nobody has to put a sort of time limit. There's no running marathon. That's the word I'm looking for. There's no marathon on how you suffer, and you know, and where you suffer. And I think that's the biggest thing. The newest, it's not so new, but it is much newer than, you know, previous ways of looking at grief. And you know, and we recognize now that there's, you know, things happen, anticipatory grief, like let's just say Danny's is coming up to the 10th year. It's not going to be an easy time. The birthdays are not an easy time. You know, all the experiences related to, so the Jewish tradition has a lot of experiences related to mourning and death. And so you have an annual day. So all of those things are triggers, right? And I think that's the best part of what we know today, and it's really changed even in the 10 years, is that we have a much broader and a much more accepting view that grief does not have to be rushed. And I think that to me is the most important message, that don't feel you have to be over it tomorrow morning.
And for you, I know that in reading your book and also just about your experience, you obviously had some help along the way. Are you still feeling like you're still going through the mourning process? I mean, does it ever end? Is this just like an ongoing thing that you constantly relive, or do you think it's steps?
Well, I'm going to answer you in 2 or 3 ways because there are really many answers to that. The first one is, if you remember, she was on the show with me, Candace Leitner, the founder of MAD, you know, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And she says grief comes in 3 stages, the beginning, the middle, and the rest of your life. And I think that's true. And I think that, and the trials, I have to tell you something, the trials are a masterful way of making people regress, let's call it, or go back to a disequilibrium. And I think that that's a really important part. So there's nothing normal about having trials in your life. Losing a child on its own is terrible. Murder is even worse. And then the trial aspects of it, they're complicating because they never ending. So that's that part. And then I look at where I am today, and people say, I see a lovely note here about my strength. I have to say that I do believe, and this is what I talk about today as well, in, you know, post-traumatic growth, post-traumatic change. And there are opportunities to lessen the pain, I would say. Never, the pain, I don't believe, really goes away in the sense that this doesn't fly out the window. But I think there's things that can lessen the pain. I also believe very strongly, which is kind of why I speak and do certain activities, also the Markel Act and so forth, that you can redefine yourself. Okay, and I think that's the strongest message, that you and use a lot of support. Like, so this is Don't wing this. This is not a solo event. This is not a solo event. And I think anybody who tries to do that, they isolate themselves and you don't get the benefit of the support that you really need. So that's the part about, the difficult grief piece.
And speaking of difficulty, Ruth, for you, you obviously lost your son, but you also lost your connection and your ability to even contact your grandsons. Talk to us about this, because not only have you had to overcome everything that happened to Dan, but then your life was halted. And I cannot imagine, Carm, my kid's grandmother, but I can't imagine my mom or Carm not in my children's life. And that's something that you are still dealing with. And you've obviously had a very huge journey from step one to where we are today. I believe it's taken something like 6 years for you. So let's talk about what that whole process was like, because you have made phenomenal changes for other families and I believe even for yourself now. So take me back to day one when you were told you weren't allowed to see the boys anymore. What was that process like for you? And at one point did you say, I have to do something to change this?
Yeah, so let me back up. Actually, the day one is really the first 2 years after Dan's murder. And so, in all fairness to this conversation about seeing the grandchildren, we did see the grandchildren in the first 2 years. And as soon as the period of the arrests and so forth happened, that was at that time that things changed. So I think that's an important point to mention the backup to that particular period of time. So the story is a difficult story. The grandparent issue for me was probably, I would say, very, very traumatic. It actually, when you have grief and this and the other, I actually was at a time where it did affect me physically in terms of I became atrial fibrillation. So that was like a reaction to the intensity of that loss. And for me particularly, it's not only the grandchildren, and I don't mind talking about this, but I'm the mother, I'm the grandmother, but I'm also the person who feels most accountable to Dan. And I want to talk about Dan as a father, because the strength of Dan's conviction and his interest to be a father. I mean, he was the scholar, he was everything else, in the world, but that was not important to him in the same magnitude as being a father. And he was exceptional as a father. And how he was exceptional was, after the divorce, before the divorce for sure, he had strong interest, but he would go to the children's daycare on the days he did not have custody, and he would have breakfast with them and so forth. And his house, they used to tease him, he got a old-fashioned clothesline in a very open style of home, and he put the clothesline across the living room, and he hung the children's pictures. Can you imagine? So you walked in fact, one of his students said, I was expecting to walk into a stuffy professor's house, and all he did is practically fall over the toys. But the point was, Dan's experience as a father is so strong. Now, that is a very big communication to me as the mother and as the grandmother to the children, because I don't just see when I'm unable to see the children, it's not just the lack of visits with the children, it's the disappointment that I feel that I have to face Dan with, right? I don't want to say the word accountable, but I certainly feel that way to his concerns and his wishes and his beliefs. So that's a very important part. It's a very strong family feeling and value system. So what happened was we were cut off in 2016. And at that time, we tried very hard through the back door to have our lawyer speak to Wendy's lawyer. And there were not any visits coming. And we as a family, everybody has seen us a lot on 2020 and on Dateline and all these programs, but we never came out before. I'm using the word came out. We never went on the programs prior to the loss of the visitation with the children. In other words, it was only then. We never went out the first 2 years. like many families go out and discuss their grief and so forth publicly. We did not, but we did try very hard to use the media, which we're very grateful, which is available to us, and nothing happened. So it started in about 2016. We have a very, very good lawyer in New York and his wife. And one day they called me up and he said, Ruth, you're going to have to write a bill. So here's my famous expression: write a bill. I'm sitting in Toronto. I'm going to write a bill in Florida. And what happened was it was in my head. And people told me, I have a lot of American friends, you're going to have to hire lobbyists. Anyway, I really didn't do anything on it for about 3 years. And this is a funny story. I think quite a few of your listeners know about it. And I'm in the trial after Garcia in 2019. And I go to the hairdresser in between. So it's the weekend Garcia's convicted. Catherine McManua has a mistrial. But there's the death penalty trial on the Monday, and it's my birthday on the Saturday. So I go to the hairdresser in Tallahassee, which I knew because I used to visit Danny frequently. And a young woman, so this is Karen Halpern Cyphers. She jumps out of her seat. This is a funny story. And she says, I'm a friend of Dan's. Let's go for coffee. I said, sure, like we finished and so forth. And as we go for coffee, she says, what can I do for you? So I blurted out, and I'm sitting on it for 3 years. It's an important point because it relates to my story about grief. You don't always, many people who lose children, lose a family member, they want to do something, but it takes them a while till they get there. And so I blurt out grandparent alienation. And this is the famous part of the story. And Karen says, done. And actually, I want to talk a little bit about that piece because it was amazing. But there is a video going around. In fact, I think Joe showed a little clip the other night. There is a video going around which shows a piece of the grandparent alienation. Sorry, not the grandparent alienation, the grandparent legislation attempts. So the video that's going around is only 2020. And that's the one with Senator Book and Senator Brandeis, and that's the first attempt through the Senate in 2020 to get the bill passed. But that was not the successful venture. I just want to tell people, if you're using advocacy, that also takes a long time, and to be patient. So the 2020 video that's sort of around right now is not the one that passed the bill. And then in 2021, they worked on the bill language. And we had two very good lobbyists who joined the team, Jeff Johnson and Amanda Stewart. And then in 2022, so this is the big year, 2022, not so long ago, in February and March is when the bill was passed in the legislature and later on in the Senate. And Governor DeSantis signed it in June of 2022. So the Markel Act is what it's called informally, but it is very helpful that it's there.
Well, and Ruth, actually, I forgot to pull that up. Space Coast, if you can find that short clip of the senator from that hearing, I believe it's like a 35-second clip that you sent to me last week. But I'll see if I can pull that up. But regardless, the interesting part about that specific hearing was that the senator did say that she was thinking of you and she didn't know whether or not, if this passes, if this would be able to help you, but she knows that down the line, it would be helping other families. So now we're in 2024.
Right.
Has that legislation been able to help you, and have other families been reaching out to you because of it now that it has been passed for almost 2 years?
So the legislation itself. So what happened really? Let's go back to 2022 because that's an important time. As the legislation was passing, suddenly after not hearing from Wendy for quite a few years, we had sent gifts and different things. We get an invitation to a bar mitzvah, which was the older boy's bar mitzvah, which would have been May of 2022. And then I said to Wendy, I said, look, Wendy, we haven't seen the boys. Can we see them on a Friday before? And she says, look, if you want an in-person visit, come now, April. So we went, Phil and I went down, And that was our first visit. Now, this is April 20th. Now, the next day, Charlie Adelson's arrested. So that changed all the dynamics again. And we weren't invited to the bar mitzvah, which was disappointing to us. There were some changes in it. But we have had, what it did do, though, we've had, some very limited types of opportunities to see the children. And my goal is to have as many of Shelley's children to see the boys, because it's, Phil and I are not getting younger. And really, it's the next generation. If there's any reunifications, that really, I'm an optimist. So it's also very good for the next generation to have really the point of, opportunity that they get to see who they look like. And they're all bigger. Like when we did see them, we showed pictures of Shelley's children, and the boys couldn't believe, because they remember them as 10 years old, right? But they're now 19, 23, and all these big kids. So that's kind of really where it's at. As far as the Markel Act, actually, that has had really some very good news to it. It is helping. People have contacted me through different ways, and and some. So they have to be serious. The Markel Act is very specific, and so it's civil. It's a civil or criminal charge against the surviving parent when there's death. So in other words, it's not this is not, people think it's grandparents' rights like en masse. It's no way. But there are people who do have very specific needs and concerns. And yes, and they have made contact, and we're working with them on it. I've just I just worked with somebody recently who actually is using the Markel Act in the next 2 weeks.
And you know what, Ruth, I was actually able to pull up this comment this video that Space Coast has for us that discusses that very thing, is, the fact that other people now will be able to use the Markel Act thanks to you. So I just want to pull this up. This is from 2020, though. So this is before the Markel Act was passed.
This is the first attempt in the Senate.
All right, here we go.
Things that I constantly thought about was Ruth and the Markels, that this may never help them have a relationship with their grandchildren. But one day, those two little boys will be able to go back and watch this hearing and see people who are fighting for them, and that those grandparents were fighting for them and fighting for the opportunity to love them and have that relationship.
Yeah, thank you for showing that. I think what's most important, and this I'm going to generalize, part of my own approach to many things is that there's a record for the children. The book is an example of it. A lot of these other podcasts and so forth are examples of having a record, and I think that becomes something that is extremely important when you are trying to make any of attempts at, let's call it, reunification, visiting, reducing brainwashing, alienation. I could throw all the words in there. And those examples really show the kids, or whoever, it doesn't have to be a kid, sometimes it's siblings, show the family members really how much you tried to get them. Once in a while, there used to be I don't even know if it's still on, but ABC had this program on reunification of families. And when I'm telling the story, there was this family where the man he was the father of one of the children, and he sent all these letters from Vietnam at the time, and nobody ever got to see him. And finally, they reunited. But the children never thought he tried to attempt to see them. So I think there's a lot of power in having this very, very sort of create the opportunity. I don't know you have the opportunity, but to create the opportunity for the record and for the family to at least have a stage for some readiness for reunification.
Well, and Ruth, the interesting part with that too is I can imagine that coming on shows like this and seeing all of the news coverage and everything that is out on the internet is so hard because there is so much raw content out there. And so I assume that oftentimes, you want to avoid certain things so you don't have to relive and see those images that you're trying to avoid. But at the same time, there is almost a beautiful legacy that's being left with this digital imprint of all of these stories. I know even on our show, we've had so many people who have said the most beautiful things about Dan and how he feels about his kids. And they always say on Joel's shows, we hope one day the boys will find this. And they always leave a little message and they're like, just in case you're watching. And they, they say some really nice words about Dan and what they witnessed, when they knew him, and he was such an involved father. So my question to you about that is, how do you feel about the internet, social media, and all of this? Because it's almost twofold. It's a beautiful thing that you can go back to and experience these really nice things. But then there's also a lot of misinformation, and there's also an abundance of information for people who, specifically family members, who are learning about this case.
So I feel very strongly in our case, I can't say for others because I know other circumstances. I believe we're in a position that we have had a very positive relationship with the media. I think that, as you know, there's the Wondery podcasts. It's in the millions. All of the other shows. It's certainly been to our advantage, and not only that, I think in certain circumstances, sometimes you learn how to work with the media too. Like there's really an opportunity here, because if I feel I have to say something or need a voice, or they usually are asking us, it's very seldom that we actually go search out the media, but there are times. And I did say something. The only thing that's a little new, I mentioned it on the program with Judy. We have a lot of new watchers. Okay, so the social media issue now is not for the adult community. It is a little bit for the younger community now, because I know all of the children, and there's a lot, they're not even children anymore. They're all young adults. There's Shelley's family is the oldest, but there's certainly Danny's family, and there's Rob's family. There's a lot of young people, and Catherine McManawa and her brother. So we're now in a new era. And I think that would be the only concern that I have now, is that the social media that's out there has some sensitivity to compassion. That's all I really want to say, is that there is some sensitivity now to much broader audiences and younger audiences.
Well, and speaking of that, specifically, like have Shelley's boys, and I know they're older, have her kids gone on and tried to look things up? Obviously, I'm sure they know a lot from you guys, but is that something that they personally go out and try to look up?
Oh yeah, but they're big kids. They know everything. Listen, when the youngest one, who's 18, so we're talking very big kids, and there's two girls and a boy. When she goes to school during the trial, the teacher tells her that he knows Danny. Like, so these are 50-year-old teachers who are Danny's age. So it's straight in her reality. And then her friends' parents. All these trials are public trials that everybody is watching. I can tell you, like, if I have 10 friends who have another 10 friends, the other 10 friends are more dedicated than the first friend, because everybody's involved. So, excuse me, there is no hiding, and they for sure are on social media.
And, right now, I know that you've obviously, the last few years, you were focused on trying to get the Markel.
Excuse me, yeah?
No, please. Have water, Ruth.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, go
ahead. The last few years, you were focused on trying to get the Markel Act passed, which was remarkable. You did that. I know it wasn't easy, but you made it look easy, and here you are.
That's a whole community, and Karen is a big champion there.
Karen is amazing, yes, and I mean, I've only met Karen via the phone, and I think maybe FaceTime, but Karen is amazing. But Ruth, you along with your community, along with your village, worked endlessly for that. But your journey isn't over. I know that you are a hard worker. You're an advocate for so many people. What are you doing now? What projects? Obviously, you have a very difficult fall coming up with Donna Adelson going back to trial. But aside from that, I know that you're working on other projects. And how are you taking everything that you experienced and giving back to other people? Because I know that you said that you do have some things in the works.
I do. I'm very active. In my own way, I would have said the journey from grief to advocacy might have ended with the Markel Act, but it isn't. And to the extent that really now I'm speaking a lot outside and very publicly out in events about homicide survivors and victims. I'm also very particularly connected with the school shootings. And probably it's a little bit about my previous work in emergency preparedness and school legislation. But I feel the school shootings is, the feeling behind me is when you see another child, because they're young, right? Usually, or it could be a teacher, is murdered, really. To me, in my heart of hearts, I say, oh my God, there goes another family. Like you could feel, I could feel, I have these antenna out now, of the vulnerability of so many of these families. So I think that is really an important part of what I'm doing right now. And I'm also doing something which you'll hear more about soon, but I really want to talk a lot about, sort of the journey from loss to well-being. And, there's a lot of demand for me to do different programs and speaking on that. So those are kind of, some of the opportunities. There is a lot of writing requests. In fact, I just got something from a request from a men's, a very big magazine in Oslo, in Norway. So I have to respond either in print or an interview. So there's a lot of media, a lot of outside media that's still very interested in the story.
And Ruth, so many people here at STS are still interested in your story. Every time we have you on, we get tons and tons of emails just saying how touching and moving your words are. So if it's okay with you, I would like to ask a couple of questions just from the community. I know people have been sending questions in this whole time. So apologies, guys. I'm new to this whole pulling questions up live thing. I saw it at the beginning, and I'm just not going to pull it up, but I remember it. It was from Annie K, who is a friend of the show. And she was saying, what has been your biggest takeaway through everything that you have experienced since 2014?
You mean since 2014, or what's the essence?
Yes. What has been your biggest takeaway from this entire journey that you've had to go through?
I think a couple things, because it's really for me to share with the audience. You need support. You cannot do this alone, and you need every kind of support. And I think that this is a really strong message. Whether it's, from the beginning of the crisis, it could be clergy, we have a lot of legal support. In the book, I talk about a murder coach, my family and our friends, and I often say they keep me standing, and I give them credit. And I also have to say, in my particular case, I do have to say, although my own background was quite difficult, not in terms of childhood difficulties. My father died, I was 9, and my mother was 38 years old, and her younger brother, who was 35, stood up, and he became the father figure. So my own history, which is in the book, is actually really a very important part of, how do you survive trauma, drama, and everything else. And so I define my own journey, really. It's a big journey, a long time journey, really is having trauma, but gifts. And I have a lot of gifts in my life, as well as a lot of trauma. So the support, I think, is really an important message.
And Ruth, this is from Rosemary Romero, who's also a friend of the show. She watches a lot of the trials with us. She's asking, how do you feel speaking out about the Adelsons?
I think this is not the place and time. I can only say, and I've said this publicly, we're the best chapter in the story. So that we're not finished the story, but we're in the best chapter now because of the fact that Charlie Adelson is convicted and Donna Adelson is in jail. And that, I think, is really the best part of the story in terms of big picture of the story. It's not a good story altogether, but at least we've made some movement.
And this is not a question, but a comment, since you know her, Katie Kool-Lady. She says, I grieve the 30-year-old me who went through so much of our murder trauma alone, not reaching out. Ruth's words are so important about support. And I know that you know her in real life. So
Katie Kool-Lady, she's having a program. I'm on there later tonight. She's doing my book. So cheers
wait,
to
at
her.
what time?
At 6 o'clock. I'm only, yeah, she's doing it. She has a lot of great guests. So everybody watch. But I'm really just I really want to thank actually Katie, you, and Judy and everyone else, because you know I'm a women's liver here too, and I always want to support all the women taking the lead. And I'm very gracious to all the men who I've worked with my whole life, because most of my life I was the only woman working in my career, which was very successful. So I think that I'm excited actually for you, for Katie Kool-Lady, and on all the others.
And Ruth, this is from Ada Shaw JD74, who is also a regular here at STS. She says, for you, Ruth, what is your favorite memory?
I think she means memory, no?
Yeah, I think she means memory. What is your favorite memory of Danny, and what brings a smile to you when you think about him?
So I like to talk about Danny when he was young. Danny is a preschooler. I've talked elsewhere, I don't think on STS. Danny was the Dennis the Menace. So this is my exciting sort of description. And I have a lot of memories of him as a preschooler. We were very proud, obviously, as he got older and so forth, but you never knew what was going to happen as a preschooler. And this was a funny story. When we moved from Montreal to Toronto, and Phil took Danny and Shelley for school supplies in a mall, Danny went and picture something like Macy's, and Danny went and he hid under the shirts in the men's department, and Phil couldn't find him. And he'd just been in Toronto for 2 weeks, and I drilled him on our home number because I was home at the time. And thank God he went to some kind of candy kiosk, and he says, Mommy, I'm lost. And of course, I told him to stay there. He's 5 years old. But Danny, that was Danny. Danny would do very eventful early preschool and a lot of memories, but he had a great temperament and high energy. So those are my real positive memories.
And I'm actually going to pull this up here. It's the speech that I had told you about over the phone, Ruth. I just want to show this. And obviously, Ruth, you feel differently because you know him, and obviously you have all of these beautiful memories of him. But so many of us don't know Dan the way that anyone that knew him did. And I just want to play this for about 30 seconds. It's probably
Sure.
The actual topic itself is probably irrelevant to, most of what everyone here will understand. But I just wanted to show, one, a video of him as opposed to just an image of him. And two, you can really just see how passionate he is about his work in this video. So here we
go. Greetings, everybody. Thank you very much to Nick and to Eugene and to Todd and all my co-panelists, as well as to the wonderful folks at the Federalist Society who have been so exceedingly generous to me for this last year. It's an honor to be here and share some thoughts with you about this big project that I've been working on this last year. It's unfortunately an incredibly and exceedingly long piece, and unfortunately Eugene got tasked with reading about the 130 pages of it. So it's probably going to become the basis of a book, and I look forward to getting your thoughts about it. And let me just sort of give you a few of the bullet points of the argument, and then if you have questions or want to follow up later, you can find me and or download the paper on SSRN. So the paper is about the tissue connecting democratic citizenship with retributive justice. And the argument is that, contrary to some of the leading criminal law theorists like Michael Moore or Doug Cusack, who insist that in order for the criminal law to be retributively just, it has to be predicated on moral wrongdoing, I argue that we need to, or that we can, as retributivists, loosen up on the criminalization question and move beyond the insistence on moral wrongdoing as a prerequisite for justifying retributive punishment, at least in liberal democracies. And that qualification of at least in liberal democracies is really quite important.
So I won't play it all, but I just wanted to show that for our viewers, just to really show Dan there in his element, and obviously, honor him in such a beautiful way, and see that he was obviously very passionate, and you could see a little bit of his personality there. At the end of the video, he ends up smiling. And when I watched it over and over, just because I feel like, we don't really get to know him. And it's such a tragedy that we just see his photos mostly. So Ruth, if you ever have any videos or anything you'd like to share, let us know, because I do think there's something special to be able to see him there in person and really get a little bit more of a sense of who he was.
Thank you. Thank you so much for showing that. I want to tell, the person asked about a memory, but I want to actually tell an important story about his career. So Dan lived in Toronto, and he went to Harvard undergrad. And when he went to Harvard Law School, in first year, he was hired back by Professor House at the University of Toronto. And Dan was not going to do criminal law. This is an interesting story if you have young listeners as well, or any listener really, but and he was not going to do criminal law. He was interested then in international treaties. But Robert House, as a professor at University of Toronto, was suggesting and writing academically that they had to pardon Nelson Mandela. So this is where we're talking now. We're into Nelson Mandela area. And he said to Dan, I'm going to hire you. And Dan was only in first year law. I mean, this was really early. And he said, I want to hire you to do the counter argument about why Nelson Mandela should not be pardoned. And Dan actually at that time said, okay, this was his summer job. And at the end of the time, when he submitted his review of the arguments, because the professor said that, everybody's going to be against me, like it was really already a very big issue at the time. And Danny wrote this paper, and they published it in 1999. He hadn't even finished law school. So the point I'm making is that changed his whole direction, that experience, and that brought him into the interest that you're just seeing on the video of criminal law. And he became a very noted scholar in the whole area of criminal law as time progressed. So thank you for showing that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for sharing that. And I'm just going to take one more question, and then I know Ruth has to get going. And for full disclosure, I was telling Ruth, I also have carpool line soon. I also just want to let everyone know we do have that video. So I will post, did we post it? I can't remember. We may have already posted it on our STS main channel, which is this one. So if not, then I will repost it, because it is incredible to see. I think it's like a 15 or 20-minute clip, maybe shorter. It is really cool to see Dan give his whole speech. Okay, and one last question. Let's see if we have anything here. Sorry, I should have flagged this here. Okay. Does Ruth know if any, here, let me pull it up. Does Ruth know if any legislatures in other states have attempted to model new laws in their states after the Markel Act in Florida? This law should be spread to all 50 states, in my opinion.
Okay, first let me just back up, because there are many states, and in Canada, many provinces that actually have grandparent rights. So we're dealing with a different question. It's not that all over the United States, there's in fact, at the very beginning, Dan's friends might have been in New York or in Boston, Massachusetts. Like, how can you let this be kind of situation? Because there were, and we have in Ontario, we actually have very good grandparents' rights. So I just want to say that not everybody else is lacking. The unique part of Florida, which is unique to Florida, is the natural parent has a lot of rights around privacy and autonomy. And that's why you have to have different kinds of grandparent legislation. Now, there is, yes, to answer the question, a few people have asked me from other states. I'm not in any process right now of, working with other states, but there have been some requests. And I think everybody has to look at sort of which legislation works in the different states that they're living in. But there is certainly a need for grandparent alienation is huge. It's not only the issue, we're not talking about murder. We have a real serious problem today within families that are estranged and grandparent alienation and parental alienation. And I think there are a few podcasts specializing in those types of issues.
Leo Wren is saying that they would like to see more deep dives because there are many topics that they would enjoy from you. Ruth is a wealth of knowledge. And again, she's as amazing in person as she has been here. So I do want to thank her. I also just want to put this photo up here as well. And just remember that we are here because of Dan Markel. And obviously we do a lot of stories, mostly Joel covering this case. But at the end of the day, Dan Markel is the victim. So is Ruth Markel. So is Phil Markel, Shelley Markel, and everyone who is involved, and all the family members and friends who have had to endure so much and fight for justice. So I do want to remember Dan Markel. I love the photo there on the right. I feel like it's such a beautiful photo. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love when you can feel the personality in a photo. So Ruth, send me more photos with personality. That's what I want.
All right, I will. Sure.
And then I also just want to share this one because that was obviously right around that time. And tell us about this photo really quickly, Ruth.
This photo actually is taken, I believe it's in 2012, and it was at Shelley's oldest daughter. I believe it's part of one of the bat mitzvah pictures. This was the informal, like not a formal part, where we were all together.
Well, I love that photo. And again, Ruth, we are so honored to have you. Anytime you want to say anything and come on here, our platform is yours. And we are obviously very appreciative that you've given us your time and your knowledge and your wisdom and your strength. So many people are inspired by you. And we are so grateful that you've chosen us to trust. You've chosen us as a platform that you trust to talk about the issues and to talk about your son. So we do want to thank you very much for coming here and for being part of our community.
Thank you. And thank you for all of the initial coverage, which I know set you on the road to start to do some true crime stuff. And it worked out well. And certainly I thank you. And I want to wish you good luck. Keep going. This is, like your opportunity to shine. So get out there and just keep going. And it's great. It's really good. And it's a privilege for me to be here.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And really quickly, I just want to put this up and thank our friends of the show. These are all of our Patreon members who give so much to the show and have been so nice and support and give us all these amazing comments and questions. So I did want to say thank you to all of our friends of the show on Patreon. Thank you to everyone else for being here. If you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe. We have a lot of phenomenal content, obviously on this case, but on so many other cases and so many other stories need to be focused on. There are so many cases. I know we've been covering missing cases where a lot of family members don't know where their loved ones are. And we're talking about children. So again, not just this case, there are so many other more important cases out there that we need to continue to cover. So thank you for being here, for Dan Markel, for Ruth Markel, and for all of the true crime victims that are still waiting and hoping for justice. We appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Please hit the like button. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.